Hi, I'm Bill Doherty, and I want to welcome the viewers to another edition of Bill's Bullpen. Bill's Bullpen is a program that's intended to give the viewers a sense of what's going on here in Bourne and also in the region. Today I have with me Mavis Robinson, who is the newly minted president of the Bourne Historical Society. Or is it historic?
Historical, yes.
Historical
yes. Bourne
Society.
Historical Society.
Now,
Yep.
the first question that's on everybody's mind is, okay, is the reason we save stuff is because it's old, or is there another reason?
That's a good question. Yeah, I mean, the reason that we save things, and the Bourne Historical Society, that's our main mission, is to save things and to preserve the history of our town. It's really to enable us to look back and learn from history. I mean, it's those who can't learn from history are doomed to repeat it. And
Yes, George.
it's yes, it's important to know where we came from, to look back and know mistakes that might have been made in the past, to sort of dig into the truth of our area. I mean, obviously. The larger world history is a bigger scope, and I get to narrow in on just what happens in Bourne. But I think it is important for us to, to sort of keep track of where we've been, so we know where we're going.
Well, I used to maintain when I was a cemetery commissioner, if we didn't have any interest in our past, we had no interest in our future.
Right.
So, and again, as you wisely said, we have to know where we've been to know where we want to go.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Now, in that in mind, what are some of the significant things that the Historic Society tries to save? What would be a landmark or a benchmark that would represent something useful from the past?
Well, it's the significance can come in all sizes. And I was just listening to a podcast yesterday from the Mass Historical Society, and
Harvard Square.
Yeah.
I missed that last night, but yeah, it was a great thing.
It's a great program, and it's great work that they do, and we're inspired by our partners, and other organizations. We always try to see what other people are doing, and one thing that they were focusing on is the very small things, and that sometimes the very small things can have as much significance as the very big things. Mm-hmm. And the program that I happened to be listening to was about copies of the Emancipation Proclamation, the early edition, before it was even proclaimed, mm-hmm. and the significance that object had in the lives of soon to be freed slaves in our country, and that this was a pamphlet that was published, and that was something that people could sort of walk around with in their pockets, mm-hmm. the assurance that this is coming, and that small thing had such huge significance. So to take it back to Bourne, we have the small things. We mm-hmm. have precious little bits of real wampum beads that were used for trading back mm-hmm. in the 1600s. But we also have huge things. We have the Joseph Jefferson windmill, which was slated to be demolished in the 70s and was moved over to the property at Eptuxet. We have Grover Cleveland's train station, which used to be in the village of Gray Gables, and now is at the property of Eptuxet as well.
And when are you going to have a real, instead of was it like 100-gallon drums sort of put together to pretend it's a steam engine? Oh,
I know. The real engine. I know. We've really, that's been on our list for a long time. Mm-hmm. And we even had, it was funny, we're working on a project right now all about Grover Cleveland, and we've laid the groundwork of research for a future caboose at the property. We sort of have our feelers out for one. As a nonprofit, we're limited in what mm-hmm. we can, what we can spend money on. But we do have Gene Campbell, who's the head of the Bourne Archives, has done some extensive research mm-hmm. on what the Pullman car that Grover Cleveland would have used to do his campaigning throughout the country, what that would have looked like. And it was very luxuriously appointed. He was actually friends with George Pullman, and so we're sort of like, part of what we do is research that maybe we're not ready for yet. Mm-hmm. Maybe it won't turn into exactly what we think it's going to turn into, but we're ready with it. So, big appreciation for Gene for being ready.
Oh, yeah.
The moment we get a train car, full-size train car, our goal is to turn that into something special and historical, and we're ready with the fabric swatches. So,
and in talking to to the viewers, it's so important that people who do have an interest in, let's say, in studying these things, that this is a place where they can go and sort of get reinforced on their interest.
yes, and so we're the historical society, and we've got our little footprint over at the historical building on Keene Street. But most people in town know that we also run the Uptuxet Trading Post Museum, and the Uptuxet Trading Post Museum. The post itself focuses on colonial history, but we have a huge story to tell about sort of the Gilded Age in Bourne history, and that's the story that we tell with the train station and the windmill. And so, and there's been a lot of sort of changes and moving around over the last 10 to 20 years, bringing that railroad station from a place where it was sort of tucked away near the Cape Cod Canal up to the front of our property, looking right at the railroad tracks. And then also having it right across from Joseph Jefferson, with Cleveland and Jefferson as fishing buddies, and as part of sort of the salon culture and the literary artistic culture that was happening in Bourne and environs. Marion was an important area for some of those intellectual reading, painting, poetry, music venues. So it's very fun to have that windmill on the property. Right now we have it set up as an art studio, and we have it as an art studio with the resident artists this year are the citizens of Bourne. We're inviting anybody who visits us this year to contribute a little mandala circle to be added to our Blooming Together sculpture. This is an initiative that we started during our daffodil days through support of the Mass Cultural Council, which is an incredible organization that provides money to small groups like us and larger museums. But they gave us a little bit of seed money, and we got the art supplies, and were able to hire some facilitators to bring this incredible collaborative art project to the museum this season. So there have been various things in that windmill throughout the years. This season it is an art studio, and you're the artist. So, if you want your art,
of course I am.
If you want your art hanging in a museum, just stop by the Uptuxet.
There used to be a venue where they call it making art a destination on the Cape, in addition to doing other things. Were you ever familiar with that?
It rings a bell. I'm probably
not. It was about 30 years ago.
Yeah.
I've been around for a long time. But I thought it was very interesting because there's so many galleries as you go down the Cape.
Yes.
And when it rains, instead of going to the mall, you'd go to a gallery.
Yes.
When my wife was alive, we'd go down to Provincetown and have a couple of margaritas. That was another life.
But the Cape is a great arts destination, and there's a history of great art, and in this Gilded Age time, the late 1800s, there were a lot of artists in Bourne. Provincetown now is sort of, feels like that's where the artists have kind of...
They can't afford to live there anymore.
Well,
They've been moving up. They've gotten to Bourne. It's like the reverse of with the rabid raccoons.
Yeah.
They went down, they go out across the bridge and went down to Provincetown. So the artists are coming back the other way.
Yeah, well, affordable housing, definitely a challenge everywhere on the Cape, and Bourne.
And speaking of housing,
yes,
isn't that one of the things that you look at as far as a representation of how we have lived in different times in our life here in Bourne?
Yeah, and this sort of brings us to the next big project that we're working on, which is we're calling it the Keene House Rescue Project, and this is an effort to rescue one of the oldest houses in town, which is dubbed the Perry Ellis Keene House, or we sort of shorten it to the Keene House, which is right at 9 Sandwich Road. And it's a property that's no longer, working for the property owner. The property owner is actually developing that land and is going to be putting in, multiple units. So it will expand some affordable housing in town. But the house itself was slated to be demolished, and we went to town meeting and got some Community Preservation Fund Act money, Community Preservation Act money to move the house to a new location. So by moving the Keene House, we have 2 spots that we're still trying to make plans to move it to one or the other. Either it's going to join the presentation that we have at Uptuxet, which is our preferred location. If for some reason we can't get it to go there, there is a little piece of town land on Sandwich Road where it could sit. But what you mentioned about that sort of the regular people, the smaller stories, we talk about, it's easier to talk about the big people, Grover Cleveland and Joseph Jefferson, and we love telling those stories because those are stories that sort of bring pride and national significance to our little humble town. But this Keene House is incredibly special. It was built in the 1600s, 1690-ish, and it's been continually occupied since then. It's remarkably unupdated.
Let's talk a little bit about the archaeology, so to speak, of the house itself.
Yep.
What makes it representative of the time that it was built?
Well, it's called, and this is something that's fun for me because I'm just learning all this stuff now. So I don't consider myself an expert, but it's a first period home. So it's one of those houses that, all the houses that we call Cape houses, we're so used to them, but it's now a house style. The little small house with and this house doesn't even have hallways. You sort of walk in to a front parlor, and then you just go from room to room to room by opening doors on the next room. So this is a unique style, the predecessor to what we see as these little Cape Cod houses, and so it's most of the houses of this style, which is what people were building in the late 1600s into the early 1700s, have been replaced or updated to the point where they're not recognizable. So having something that is relatively unchanged since the 1690s is really special.
Okay, now, is that what they used to call a salt box style?
I don't think it's the salt box. I feel like the salt box has that different kind of roof style, but this is like a true, Cape Cod, a cape.
Is it one or two stories?
It's a story and a half.
Okay.
So the second floor is truly just really
So it has a sloped roof.
It has the sloped roof, and
Does it have dormers?
there's no dormers. Nope, there's no dormers.
Okay. Well,
Yeah.
Okay, but so how does light get into the upper story?
It's not, well, there are windows on the sides,
side,
and
okay.
and currently, and this is going to be part of the fun of research, is figuring out what exactly did it look like in 1690. Because right now, when you go upstairs to the house, very, very narrow staircase. It would never pass, current zoning. Narrow and steep. It's open. The rooms upstairs are sort of roughly divided into sections, into two large rooms, but you could see that it could become 4 smaller rooms. But the light kind of gets through the upstairs windows that are on the sides of the house. So, but yeah, and light was an issue because obviously there was no electricity back in 1690 something either. So
How was a house like that heated?
well, beautiful central fireplace, which is still prominent.
A central fireplace?
Yes.
Those of us who know something about heat management
Yes.
would say that your heating device has to be on an outside wall, and then it would heat the interior. A central heat means you're sitting between the heat and the cold.
Yes, yes. You're sitting between the heat and the cold, although that fireplace is heating up, not only the bricks, but there's a they call it a beehive oven as all part of the fireplace structure. So the structure and there were fireplaces in multiple rooms. So when you first walk into the room, you're in the house, you're in the parlor, there's your fireplace, but then you walk through and there's also on the kitchen side the fireplace. Same structure, but just different access points. Upstairs, there are also little accesses to that same chimney through a fireplace, two fireplaces. So
One of the issues that we found in modern life as far as fireplaces, because I lived in one of those kind of houses, was that the brick was not a fire-resistant brick. It was just a paver that they built a fireplace with. So God help you, once a grout went on it, you'd have smoke inside the house. You'd also have overheating in the upper stories that you were relying upon to heat that upper story.
Yeah.
Does those folks face that, or was the brick exposed?
Well, this is going to be the fun of discovery. By having this house and by preserving it and presenting it as a museum, This is where we're going to be, tapping people who have already, I mentioned the research that's already kind of done and waiting for its opportunity. We've got piles of research, in various places to sort of help us tell the story of the house. So I don't know the exact answer to that question, but that'll be the fun of building the museum. One interesting thing about the fireplace, this is a house that has already been moved one time. So when the house was built originally, it was on the other side of Keene Street. It was right across the street.
How on earth did they move it?
Well, there's different theories of how they moved it. Did they get it onto some sort of a rolling cart or logs, or that'll be part of the story that we'll get to tell. But they moved it across the street. And before they moved it, they took down the chimney, because that was sort of the expensive, not expensive, but the heaviest, most complicated part. And so the chimney was dismantled, the house was moved across the street, the chimney was put back together. And we do have documentation that the bricks were turned around. And I don't know, if what the reason would be to sort of
I can tell you the reason.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Because what happens is that, the fire attacks the surface of wherever it's exposed to, and in order to renew the interior, which is the safety issue, it would make sense from a practical point of view to reverse the brick and then re-put it up.
Well, there you go.
And then on the outside, you could use on the outside of the brick, you could then sandblast it and to clean it up that way.
Yep. Well, whoever did the original move back in 1776 didn't bother with sandblasting, didn't really even clean it up that well. Or if they did, it's still very evident that the bricks that are now facing to the interior of the house are blackened with soot.
And by the way, it can be done chemically with muriatic acid, which I'm sure they had available.
Yeah.
Because that interior, now exterior, would have a smoky smell to it, which isn't very pleasant.
Right.
Yeah.
But this is for the joy of restoring this house for the purposes of a museum rather than as a residence. Because we won't be living there, we're able to preserve the blackened bricks as part of the story of the house. And so, what we will be doing moving forward is adding to our pile of research, learning about the house, and having these little interesting facts that we can, tell visitors and talk about once we're actually have the house set up as a museum. So
okay. Let's talk a little bit about the floors. Were they wide pine boards?
They're wide pine boards.
So in other words, you have to refinish them quite often.
I guess you would, although they're gorgeous. They're in great shape. Walking in the house I had pretty low expectations, because when something's that old and it has been continuously occupied, wear and tear, and I was expecting maybe
Some
we
of
have
us
a
tend
70s.
to be preserved longer than others.
Well, yeah. Well, and also it's survivor's bias. Once something makes it past a certain amount of time, probably the reason it made it was because it was pretty solid and well constructed. And so I think that's the case with this house. The beams in the basement seem very solid. They're really hard to the touch. They're not crumbling. There's no powder post beetles or anything like that. There doesn't seem to be if there's any rot, it's very minimal, and it would be sort of on the outer sides of the sills. But yeah, the wide pine floors are in place, and they look gorgeous to me. Gorgeous enough for a museum. I don't know what you would do if you were buying this to start to live there, but it is remarkably updated. There's some sheetrock on the walls, but in a few places for examination purposes, the sheetrock has been removed, and you can see that the original wood panel is right there. The ceilings are in great shape. The beams look good. They still have the the original plaster.
Come on. It's not naughty pine. Is it naughty pine wood walls?
Yeah, behind the sheetrock.
We've been using naughty pine on the South Shore and the Cape all these years.
Yes.
That's amazing.
And it's beautiful. It's it's been painted. And we have a lot of enthusiastic members who are going to help us bring it back to a place that makes sense without changing too much about it.
Let's talk a little bit about the kitchen in this kind of a house. Okay, in modern kitchens, we usually have some sort of not a bench, but a counter.
Correct.
Okay,
Yep.
and the counter in modern houses is usually against a wall. Was the counter against the wall in this house?
There's no counter against the wall right now. What we suspect is that that whatever kitchen fixtures would have just been furniture, which is no longer present. Because there's, one thing I was expecting was, are we going to walk in and have a 70s style tiled kitchen, or formica cabinets or something?
Linoleum,
Yeah, linoleum, right. But there's nothing that, that's not in place. The one room that did get updated, they took a bedroom at one point and turned it into a bathroom, and it's that's not at all period, and we won't end up keeping that bathroom the way it is. So that's a restoration opportunity. But the kitchen itself really is just the room without furnishing now. But it's got the beehive oven, and so you're
Talk a little bit about the beehive oven. I keep thinking of that as something that you do a lot of smoking in.
Well, they would probably do their baking in it, and a lot of their cooking. So the cooking is happening, especially in the 1600s, is going to be happening literally over the fire. And some of the fixtures and stories that we tell at Uptuxet with the earlier colonial times will also apply to the slightly later colonial. You have these pots with little feet so that you can scrape some coal over to the side and set a pot over, with the feet to sort of give yourself a little burner.
Is that what those feet are for?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
It's to allow you to sort of have your fire, take some coals, and then you can set your pot right on top without having it directly sitting on coals. So.
Okay, now, does this have a basement?
Well, it depends on who you ask. I say yes. The basement is it's really a root cellar, but it's extensive and it's gorgeous. And this is the piece that I can't figure out how to. We haven't figured out how and if we're going to be able to move the basement. It's beautifully pieced together with just these gorgeous stones, of all different sizes, field stone, and it would be a lot to sort of take apart and try to put back together. I think it's worth trying, even if it's just for demonstration purposes to show what it was. But it's a root cellar. There's a little window that lets some light in, and this was the earliest, refrigerator or pantry. And you actually access it through the pantry, which is still in place. So
Now, in one of the buildings you have over your site now, if you open up a trap door, you look down, there is I guess a rock cellar.
Yes.
That's underneath it.
Yes.
What's that used for?
So, I mean, currently we just for modern purposes use it for dehumidifying purposes. But no, the thought was that was most likely used as some sort of a root cellar, which would have been the early refrigeration. We have to get food underneath the ground in order to keep it at a
55
reasonable.
degrees year round.
Yes, yeah. So you're not might not be keeping popsicles like we do today, but it would allow food to last longer, and any place where people were setting up a permanent settlement, whether it was the English immigrants who came over or the Wampanoag who were here originally, humans were burying their food in some way or the other to keep it fresh for longer, especially through the warm months. So
Actually, we know a lot about ice because in Boston, for example, they used to get ice from Maine. They used to ship it by barge down to Boston, and then they would cover it with sawdust, and they would have ice through the summertime.
Yes,
And, and I remember that your Iceman. You're probably not old enough to remember this, but there used to be a card that you'd put in the window, and the card would be oriented so that the amount of ice that you wanted, 25, 50, 75 cents or $1, it would be in there. The problem with having an ice box as opposed to a refrigerator is my grandfather used to go after fish in the summertime when we were living in White House Beach, and all we had was an ice box. So when he would go after squid, we would have to eat that squid within about 3 days.
Yeah.
Okay, and he would make this horrible marinara sauce with the squid in it, and he would cut up it in little rings. And whenever I see not full clams, but clam strips, that's what I think about.
brings back tough
so
memories.
So when my son came back from Spain, he said they had this great snack in Barcelona. They had the squid on a stick.
Yeah.
I said, how come we never had squid growing up? I said, because I ate it all, when I was growing up.
Yeah.
Okay, now we're almost at the end of this, believe it or not. But the thing we want to talk about is you're going to move this house.
We're going to move this house.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now,
yeah.
I keep thinking there are three things you could use to move it. One, the obvious one is that you put it on a truck and you move it over there. Then you think about where it's going, all these curves and so forth. Then the second part is, when I was in the Army, we had something called a sky crane, which is basically a helicopter, and you lift it up and you move it over and you drop it down, on another site. And then the third thing, because we've done this a lot with older houses from Europe and reconstructed them here, is to take it apart and then move it. So, what is the Historic Society moving towards?
So the most substantial information that we have, the quotes, the written quotes from movers, is the first option, which would be putting it on a truck and trying to take it down the various narrow roads. We actually did bring up, it was sort of brought up in jest, the thought of using a helicopter in one of the society's board meetings, sort of, wouldn't that be, that would take care of it. So almost like if we had a magic wand. We do have a couple of folks that are pursuing that with the 26th Air Wing, I believe, of the,
yeah, because when I was in the service, we did move large, substantial items like tanks,
yes,
and vehicles and airplanes too.
Yeah, yeah.
To move it over, let's say, inappropriate terrain in order to get it where we wanted to go.
Well, and at one point they even considered doing that. The Katamet Schoolhouse was going to be moved at some point in either the 70s or 80s, and it was designated. It was about to be moved by helicopter. So it definitely is a possibility. It's a challenge logistically to try to coordinate with a government agency, and we sometimes look back on the way things were done in the old days. Not even that old ago. In the 70s or 80s, where you might just be neighbors with the guy who runs things at the Air Force Base, and so magical things can happen.
Joint Base Cape Cod, does have a large population of military here.
Yes, yes.
And given the things, that they want, they might cooperate with us on different things. Okay, but how about the third option about deconstructing and reconstructing?
So we did look into that. We had a local contractor who was willing to give us an opinion on that. And the consensus opinion from all the house movers that we've talked to, and including this last local guy, is that because of the nature of how the house is connected, and we talk about that central, fireplace, chimney, beehive oven, that it would damage the structural integrity of the house to try to deconstruct it. Now, there's one piece that we can easily take off and put back on. There's a little vestibule in the front that adds, maybe about 5 feet to the width of the house, or the length, or whichever way you're depending on how you're looking at it. So that can be taken off and then put back on, which would actually make it narrower to take down, and that taking that little piece off is the change in the dimensions that might make it possible to get that to abtucts it. And that's what we're really trying to do.
Okay, so now we can end on an air of optimism.
Yeah.
That there are possibilities, and you are addressing it. And of course, it's been very interesting to talk about where we've been as a community, and kinds of the things that we're trying to preserve that memory for all of us.
Yes.
And I want to thank the viewers. We actually come to the end of this. I want to thank the viewers for watching and learning a little bit more about what goes on here, and thank Mavis for coming and sharing all the information with us.
Thanks for having me, Bill.
You're welcome. And this has been a production of Bourne TV.